We know we need oil in Alberta, but we also need to diversify our economy. How are you going to attract startup businesses and old business to Alberta? Great question, Peter. First of all, some good news. Alberta's economy has diversified significantly in recent decades. About 30 years ago, 1/3 of our GDP, that is 1/3 of our economy, was tied to oil and gas. That's now down to about 19%. So oil and gas has shrunk as a share of the Alberta economy by about 1/3, even while that industry has grown in absolute terms, meaning that other sectors of the economy have grown more quickly than oil and gas. A lot of that's happened because of population growth and migration to Alberta. That let's just take stock of that good news. Second point, what I don't want is politicians and bureaucrats trying to impose centralized schemes for economic diversification. We've seen this movie before. We all remember what happened in the late 1980s when the mid and late 1980s when the Alberta government invested billions of tax dollars through grants and loan guarantees on industries that were meant to diversify the Alberta economy, and they lost our shirt. Many of those so-called investments went belly up, which so often happens when politicians are, quotes, investing other people's money. So I prefer to let the market take the lead on diversification, getting the economic fundamentals right to make Alberta a destination for capital and investment in the whole spectrum of industries. Third point should be to do no harm. But the NDP policies of higher taxes, additional regulations, higher labor costs, and especially higher power prices, I believe, are going to reduce diversification of our economy. You know, what are some of the industries that we would like to diversify into? Well, perhaps manufacturing, agri-food, or food processing, for example. Well, these kinds of industries are very dependent on, very tied to power prices. The NDP is in a rush to shut down our coal-fired electricity plants, replace them with much more expensive forms of intermittent power, and then also to subsidize base generation through natural gas, for example. All of this, it's estimated, is going to cost us about $30 billion. It's going to be passed on to consumers in the form of higher power prices and taxpayers with higher taxes. How are you going to bring manufacturers here while you're increasing one of the major input costs, which is power prices? So first, we are more diversified. Secondly, we shouldn't have politicians directing the economy. Thirdly, do no harm. And the fourth point, I've got some ideas about how we can attract the kind of human capital that can create a startup culture in Alberta. Alberta controls about 6,000 positions for primary economic immigrants from around the world through the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program. There are tens of thousands of some of the brightest young people in the world in the United States, many of them graduates of some of the top research universities on the planet, that are working for tech companies, for example, in Silicon Valley, but they can't get their green cards. I'd like to develop a pilot program within the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program to offer immediate permanent residency to some of these brilliant young people if they have a credible offer of financial support for their startup enterprise, to try to create a Silicon Valley North